Welcome to HK Citizen Podcast, and this is This Week Unpacked.
Hello there.
Our mission here really is to take the stories and analysis we've put out on hkcitizen.net articles that we've actually written ourselves.
That's right.
And we'll dive a bit deeper. We want to pull out the key insights, help you understand what's really going on behind the headlines, and just give you that informed perspective.
And we've certainly got a mixed bag this week. Everything from, well, genuine joy to some quite difficult policy debates.
Absolutely. The full spectrum, as you say. The articles we're unpacking today are congratulations to the Peppa Pig family on their new member. Always nice to start with that.
Mm-hmm.
Then UK and EU strike new fisheries deal, access extended to 2038, sparking debate over fishermen's interests.
A controversial one.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Also, Labour government's immigration white paper sparks policy contradiction debate.
Which leads into the next one.
Exactly. UK immigration white paper sparks outrage. The NO. Visa future hangs in balance. As cross-party MPs demand clarity, Labour government rushes to consult.
Very significant concerns there.
And finally, something with very deep historical roots. Chagos Islands. Handover sparks fury. Labour accused of betraying UK. Chagossians sued a halt plan.
Quite a range, as you said.
Right then, let's get stuck in. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with, well, something that just brought a smile this week.
Yes, lovely news from the world of Peppa Pig. The family has grown.
That's right. A new baby girl for Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig. Born 5:34 a.m. British summertime, 20th of May, the article said.
And it's quite something. The first new family member in, what, 21 years?
21 years, yeah. And she's called Evie Pig, apparently named after Mummy Pig's aunt, which is a nice touch.
A sweet detail. And the big reveal was actually on Good Morning Britain.
Ah, okay.
And for the fans, there's a special episode coming up, Peppa Meets the Baby. That airs on the 30th of May, part of the 10th season finale.
It's amazing, isn't it, how that show, started back in 2004, by Neville Astley and Mark Baker, has become this global phenomenon. Over 40 languages, 180 countries. It just taps into those universal themes, I suppose. Family, friendship.
Growing up, yeah, it really does. And adding a baby, well, it brings new energy, doesn't it? New stories about family dynamics.
Definitely. A nice bit of shared cultural sort of warmth amidst heavier news.
A welcome bit of light relief, yes. Before we move into, well, rather more complex territory.
Indeed. We're shifting now from children's TV to the slightly less straightforward world of international policy.
Quite literally moving into murky waters, perhaps, with the UK-EU fisheries agreement.
Yes. This deal struck recently. It basically extends EU fishing rights in UK waters, doesn't it?
That's the headline, yes. The core outcome from the London summit is that EU vessels keep their access to parts of the UK's economic zone, that's the 6 to 200 nautical mile area,
Okay.
until the 30th of June, 2038. So a 12-year extension on the current setup.
Right. And what about the quotas? Are they changing much?
Well, no, not under this specific deal. The current quotas stay. So the EU keeps its share, roughly 25% of the total catch in UK waters. No increase for them, no reduction for UK fishermen within this agreement.
Okay.
But what is quite significant is the other part of the package, the UK government's investment pledge.
Ah, yes, the $3.6 billion.
Exactly. That's earmarked for revitalizing the UK fishing sector. So modernizing boats, training, supporting coastal communities, especially places like Scotland.
Right.
And there's a joint commitment on monitoring fish stocks for sustainability, which is, crucial.
And the article mentioned the SPS agreement too, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. That sounds important for exports.
It really is. Simplifying the paperwork for UK seafood going to the EU, which is a massive market. That's been a big post-Brexit headache, so addressing it is key.
It sounds like the negotiations were a bit of a tussle, though.
Oh, definitely. The EU apparently wanted permanent access. The UK wanted a shorter limit. The source suggests Keir Starmer pushed for this 12-year compromise, framing it as, well, stability now, but keeping options open later.
But as you said, controversial. Not everyone's convinced it's a good deal.
Far from it. Supporters will point to, smoother exports, potentially helping recover from that post-Brexit dip in trade. Maybe even lower fish prices down the line for consumers, though that's always debatable.
And the economic boost from that investment.
Yes, the projection is that the $3.6 billion could add something like $9 billion to the economy by 2040.
Okay, but the critics, Nigel Farage calling it a surrender.
That language is certainly being used. Critics argue the UK hasn't really taken back control of its waters, that they're still being, quote, plundered.
And specific groups are unhappy.
Yes, particularly fishing communities, say, in Scotland. They feel it doesn't cut EU access enough, harming their local businesses. You've also got figures like Kemi Badenoch raising concerns about potentially being tied to EU rules indirectly.
And the National Federation of Fishermen's Organizations.
They acknowledge the export benefits, the SPS stuff, but they're still wary about the long-term competition from EU fleets in UK waters.
So it really boils down to that tension, doesn't it? Trying to get diplomatic stability and trade benefits versus protecting the domestic industry. What does this actually mean for you, the listener?
Well, it means the debate over the future of fishing isn't going away. It could affect the economy in coastal areas, and yes, potentially the price and availability of the fish you buy. It's a classic policy balancing act.
And speaking of balancing acts and complex policy, this fisheries deal is just one part of the government's wider post-Brexit adjustments, which brings us neatly, I suppose, to the immigration white paper.
Right, Labour's new white paper. And it's certainly got people talking, especially about what look like, well, contradictions.
The stated aims seem quite clear, though, don't they? Tightening things up.
Very much so. The headline goal is to significantly reduce legal migration. They talk about easing pressure on public services, housing, NHS, and wanting to prioritize jobs and training for young Britons. Reducing net migration is the target.
And the measures proposed reflect that. Raising salary thresholds, longer waits for settlement.
Exactly. Higher salary thresholds for skilled workers, extending the minimum residency for indefinite leave to remain, stricter family visa rules, higher English language requirements, scrapping some work visas, and introducing this Australian-style points system.
Keir Starmer used phrases like regain control, linking it to economic recovery.
Yes, framing it as necessary for a fair and sustainable economy.
Okay, but then there's this other agreement signed around the same time. That's where the contradiction comes in.
That's the point critics are seizing on, yes. The Youth Mobility Agreement with the EU. It's a separate deal, allows EU citizens under 30 to come here short-term work, study, exchange.
And vice versa for young Brits going to the EU.
Right, it's reciprocal. But the real flashpoint highlighted in the article is about university tuition fees for those EU young people coming here to study.
They'll pay domestic fees now, not the higher international ones.
Exactly, which is a major shift from the post-Brexit situation. So you have the white paper aiming to tighten student visa routes, particularly thinking about non-EU students who pay those higher fees.
And then this separate deal potentially brings in more EU students at the lower domestic fee rate.
Precisely. The government argues they serve different purposes. White paper for long-term migration control, EU deal for short-term, reciprocal youth exchange that benefits young Brits too.
But the critics aren't buying that distinction.
No. They say the EU deal undermines the white paper's aim to control student numbers and types. There are worries about the financial impact on universities' fewer high-fee international students, more lower-fee EU ones.
And potentially more competition for places for UK students.
That's another concern raised, yes. Does it undermine the prioritizing young Britain's goal? And you have figures like Nigel Farage calling it a backdoor reintroduction of free movement, though the government strongly rejects that label.
So it looks like a real political balancing act, trying to sound tough on migration domestically while still engaging internationally, especially with Europe.
Absolutely. And the article points out the risks involved, potential job competition, temporary stays possibly becoming long-term, the financial pressures on universities, and just the sheer complexity for the Home Office to manage it all. That call for political clarity needed really stands out.
Understanding that tension gives you a sense of the pressures shaping policy right now.
It certainly does. Trying to please everyone is rarely possible in policy.
Now let's zoom in from that general immigration picture to a very specific and frankly very worrying aspect for one particular group. The lack of clarity around the B&O, visa for Hong Kongers. This is where it gets deeply concerning for many.
Incredibly concerning. You've got around 220,000 people here on that visa. And the fact the white paper didn't explicitly say this scheme is exempt has caused, well, huge anxiety.
Remind us why that B&O scheme, launched back in Jan 2021, was seen as such a lifeline. What made it accessible?
Its accessibility was key. Really low barriers, no minimum skills, salary, or job offer needed. Just the B&O status itself. Crucially, it included family members, dependents.
Right, so whole families could move.
Exactly. And it offered clear visa options, 2.5 or 5 years, with fees and the health surcharge, yes. But importantly, rights to work, study, use the NHS, and a defined path to settlement after 5 years, then citizenship a year later.
And it was flexible too, wasn't it? No cap ways for adult children to apply.
Yes, updates were made to include adult children. Even asylum seekers could apply under certain conditions. And the process was largely digital. It was designed to be relatively straightforward given the circumstances.
Okay, so given those features, how could the proposed reforms in the white paper potentially hit BNO holders if they're not exempted?
The biggest fear revolves around doubling the settlement wait time from 5 years to 10 years for most migrants. The white paper only hinted at faster routes for very specific high-skill jobs.
And applying that to BNO holders would mean, what? More visa renewals, more costs.
Huge extra cost, potentially thousands more pounds in renewal fees. And it completely messes up people's plans, buying a house, settling down, building a life here based on that 5-year expectation.
And the fear could be retrospective, applying even to those already partway through.
That's caused immense anger. The idea that the goalpost could be moved midway is seen as a massive betrayal.
Then there's the English language requirement A-level standard.
Right. The current BNO visa doesn't have a formal test. While most Hong Kongers report good English, the source says around 90% an A-level requirement could be a barrier, especially for older dependents. Plus, the cost and hassle of tests.
And the points-based system, how might that affect people?
Well, points systems usually favor high skills, high salaries, specific professions. Since the BNO route deliberately didn't have a skills threshold, many Hong Kongers are in jobs like retail, hospitality, care work.
Jobs that might not score highly on a point system.
Exactly. So they could struggle to meet requirements for visa renewal or settlement down the line if that system were applied wholesale.
And you mentioned care work. The specific plan to scrap the dedicated care visa is another worry.
Yes, because care work has been an accessible employment route for many. The white paper suggests prioritizing UK workers for those roles, which could force BNO care workers to find completely different jobs just to stay eligible.
The reaction to all this potential impact has been pretty fierce, hasn't it? Across the political divide.
Absolutely furious from all sides. Senior Conservatives Lord Patten, the last governor of Hong Kong, Damien Green, Jeremy Hunt, wrote a letter calling the lack of clarity a betrayal of a historic duty, demanding an immediate exemption from the 10-year rule.
Liberal Democrats, too. Ed Davey.
Yes. Davey called the BNO commitment a solemn promise, saying treating holders like second-class migrants is unacceptable. Bobby Dean warned the 10-year rule would devastate futures.
Even voices within Labour expressing concern.
Yes. MPs like Blair McDougall talking about the UK needing to be a safe haven. Phil Brickell warning it would shatter Hong Kongers' trust.
And the SNP in Scotland, Joanna Cherry, highlighting their contribution and calling the potential 10-year rule unjust and a breach of moral obligation. Peers in the Lords, too, Lord Alton, Benedict Rogers, using words like catastrophic.
So, faced with this unified backlash, the government had to act. The Home Office has announced this urgent 8-week public consultation.
Running July, August this year, looking specifically at these reforms.
Yes, asking for views on the settlement period, English levels, the point system. They've promised results by October, legislation maybe early 2026, implementation April 2026.
And crucially, they've promised clarity on the BNO scheme's status by October.
That's the pledge. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is quoted saying they need to balance immigration control with our humanitarian duty, and the BNO visa's unique status is under careful review.
But in the meantime, the human impact of this uncertainty is immense.
It really is. The UK Hong Kongers Association warns about the upheaval, the financial strain, the mental toll on 220,000 people. The article mentions individuals like Miss Chan, who moved her life based on the 5-year settlement path and now feels completely lost.
And the worry it might deter others from coming.
Yes, community groups fear it damages the UK's reputation as a reliable safe haven. It just highlights that clash between broad policy goals and specific commitments.
What stands out to you here? It feels very raw.
It feels like a moment where abstract policy proposals are colliding very painfully with real lives and real promises made. And that call to action in the source urging Hong Kongers to engage with the consultation, contact MPs, feels incredibly important right now. Their future here really hangs in the balance.
Okay, let's shift focus again. Moving from policy affecting individuals seeking refuge to a long-running international dispute tangled up with colonial history and major power strategy. The Chagos Islands handover plan.
Yes, this is the Labour government's move to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, that archipelago in the Indian Ocean, to Mauritius. But as the headline suggests, it's sparking fury.
From whom? It's not straightforward, is it?
No. Opposition comes from two main camps. The Chagossian islanders themselves, the original inhabitants who were forcibly removed, they're suing to block this specific deal. And then you have conservative critics in the UK raising strategic concerns.
And right at the center of it all is the Diego Garcia military base.
Absolutely critical. It's a joint UK-US base, but primarily used by the US. Hugely strategic location in the Indian Ocean.
The article really stressed its importance, supporting operations across the Middle East, Asia, Africa, monitoring shipping lanes, a key part of the UK-US alliance, about 2,000 US personnel there.
It's been leased to the U.S. since 1966. That lease runs to 2036. But a key part of this proposed handover deal with Mauritius involves securing a new, very long-term 99-year lease for the U.S. base to continue operating.
But to understand the theory, you need the history.
Yeah.
The eviction.
You absolutely do. The Chagos Islands, over 60 of them, originally French, then British from 1814 along with Mauritius. But in 1965, just before Mauritian independence, the UK separated the Chagos Islands, created the British Indian Ocean Territory, BIOT.
Specifically for the U.S. base.
Exactly. And that led to the forced removal of the entire population, the Chagossians, between 1,500 and 2,000 people, between 1967 and 1973.
Using pretty brutal methods, the source says. Cutting supplies, killing pets.
Horrific tactics to force them off their homeland. They were dumped mainly in Mauritius and the Seychelles, facing poverty, discrimination, the loss of their culture. It's this deep injustice that fuels their fight.
Now, internationally, there's pressure for a handover, isn't there? The ICJ ruling, the UN.
Yes, the International Court of Justice in 2019 ruled UK control unlawful, part of an incomplete decolonization. The UN General Assembly then voted overwhelmingly for the UK to return the islands to Mauritius. So the government's plan aligns with that international legal pressure.
But, and this is the crucial point, the Chagossians themselves are fiercely against this particular deal transferring sovereignty to Mauritius. Why? What are their objections in the legal case, like the one from Bernadette Dugasse and Bertrice Pompe?
Several key reasons. One, they feel completely sidelined, excluded from the negotiations between the UK and Mauritius, their homeland treated like a bargaining chip, as Chagossian voices put it.
Two, they profoundly distrust the Mauritian government. They fear facing discrimination again, remembering the poverty and hardship they endured there after the eviction.
Three, the deal shatters their long-held dream of actually returning home. Diego Garcia, the main island where many lived, will remain a military base off limits. Their right of return isn't secured.
And finally, unresolved justice.
Yes. They demand proper reparations and apologies from the UK for the eviction, which they consider a crime against humanity. They fear this handover is a way for Britain to wash its hands of responsibility without delivering real justice or acknowledging their right to self-determination.
Labor's argument is that the deal follows international law, secures the vital U.S. base, advances decolonization, and, as Keir Starmer put it, rights a historic wrong.
While the conservative opposition focuses on the strategic risks, Tom Tugendhat arguing that giving sovereignty to Mauritius could jeopardize control over the base, weakening UK global influence.
And they're raising concerns about potential Chinese influence over Mauritius, though the source called those claims baseless.
Yes, that China threat card has been played. There are also questions about the costs, the reported $1.01 billion annual lease payment for the base, adding up to $34 billion over 99 years.
And there's a recent legal twist, a temporary halt.
A high court injunction briefly paused the process in late May, though it's now been lifted. But the actual transfer date is still uncertain because of these ongoing challenges. In the Chagossian community, maybe 10,000 scattered around the world, they vow to fight on.
So if you connect the dots here, it's this incredibly complex knot of colonial history, human rights abuses, international law, and hard-nosed geopolitical strategy, all playing out and impacting real people.
A stark reminder that the legacies of colonialism are still very much alive and shaping current events, forcing difficult choices about how to balance historical wrongs with present-day strategic interests.
Right then, as we wrap up this week's Unpacked Stories, we've covered quite a spectrum.
We certainly have, from, the simple joy of Peppa Pig's new arrival,
through the economic and political arguments around the UK-EU fisheries deal,
then into the complexities and, well, apparent contradictions of the immigration white paper.
focusing sharply on the very real anxiety and uncertainty facing visa holders.
And finally, grappling with those deep historical and geopolitical currents surrounding the Chagos Islands.
It really gives you a sense, doesn't it, of the range of issues facing the UK: cultural moments, tough domestic policy choices, and complex international relations.
And how often, as with the B&O visa holders and the Chagossians, these big policy decisions have deeply personal human consequences.
So, as we've seen this week, navigating global relationships, whether it's with the EU on fishing or addressing colonial legacies like the Chagos Islands, or deciding who belongs here through immigration policy, it always involves this balancing act. Competing interests, economic sovereignty, international law, but also, crucially, individual rights and hopes. What trade-offs do you think are the toughest for policymakers to navigate in all this?
Gosh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I suspect it's often that tension between perhaps a perceived short-term national interest or political gain and the longer-term moral or historical responsibilities, especially when fulfilling those responsibilities might involve costs or perceived compromises. It's rarely easy.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you very much for joining us for this deep dive on This Week Unpacked.
Yes, thanks for listening. And if you want to read more on any of these stories, all the analysis is on our website, hkcitizen.net, and you can follow us on our social media channels, too.
Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
This deep dive was produced in London.